Hi, my name is Mary, and in today's video I'm going to be sharing with you the next 5 books that I'm reading for my project of reading a book from every country. In today's video I'm going to be sharing with you the books that I've read from Equatorial Guinea, the Dominican Republic, Taiwan, India, and Morocco. In today's video, I also want to point out that all of the books that I have read for this month fall into the LGBT category, either because of their authors or because of their main primary characters. And that's because it's June and I wanted to do something a little bit special for Pride Month. Let's get right into the books. I'm going to start off with a bang right away with one of the books that I really enjoyed this month. That was this one, Infideles by Abdellah Taia. Now, this is a tiny little novella. Most of the books that I have read this month were novellas, but I chose this one because the premise seemed kind of controversial, kind of interesting. So, in this particular book, we follow 3 generations of a family, 2 women and then 1 young gay man, who, for one reason or another, find themselves isolated by their communities on the kind of basis of their sexuality. For the women in the family, it is because they are prostitutes and kind of what he calls witch doctors, rather that they encourage healthy sex between married couples and are seen as kind of a necessary but ultimately dirty aspect of polite society. On the other hand, the young gay son is struggling with how he feels growing up as a Muslim and growing up in a community that he feels does not respect him. Now, this is a really deeply sad book. I picked it up and I really wasn't expecting to fall in love with any of the characters, but I really did. This book uses stream of consciousness narration, which means that you are inside the characters' heads, and hearing the young boy tell the stories of his older family or hearing the grandmother talk to the mother is so powerful, and it really does prove that you can have a child narrator whose ignorance doesn't make them stupid or annoying to read, but rather it provides a really great lens for a reader to get a sense of some of the contradictions, I suppose, that you have in any modern society. This was a book that is rife with really tough topics, but I think handles them really well because we're inside the characters' heads and you can feel how they felt, and it becomes a novel that isn't trying to shock you really in any way. Rather, it's just a novel that knows how to handle these mature topics. I absolutely loved this one and I was really excited to read it. I gave this one 5 stars. The next book I'm going to talk about I had a little bit less success with. That was this one, La Bastarda by Trifonia, Melibea, Obono. Again, this is a quite short little book, and in it we follow a young woman who has become an orphan of Bastarda because her father has been estranged from her family and she's had to been adopted by her grandparents. Now, her grandparents are very concerned with upholding tradition, and she's a little bit of a tomboy and a little bit of a misfit. Her preoccupation with her father drives her away from her family as a whole. Instead, it drives her towards her gay uncle, who she believes is also an outcast of her kind of family dynamic, and who she believes will actually help her to find her father. Along the way, she meets a group of young women who are experimenting with their alternative sexuality with each other, and in that way she falls in love with one of these young women. So it really is a novel about an outcast finding her family, a new family, or perhaps just trying to find a place with other outcasts. Unfortunately, this one struck me as a concept that I was very excited for, but an execution that I felt was a little bit lacking. The thing is that this novel handles these kinds of topics of community separation with very stark and static prose, which makes it feel a little bit immature. Again, I'm not sure if that's because of the translation. This is one of those problems that I find a lot in translations, is when the prose is lacking. I never know if that's because of the original text or because of the translation. But there is no sensory input in this story, and there wasn't any really strong emotional tugging at my heartstrings that I really wanted there to be. So while reading this, it felt very inconsequential, which is not something I want to feel about such a dramatic topic. And unfortunately, this one I ended up just giving 2 stars. This next one didn't exactly capture my heart either. That is this book, Tentacle by Rita, Indiana. Now, this one I struggled with because the concept of it is quite difficult to explain. It is very convoluted. It is sort of a post-apocalyptic dystopian sci-fi novella. It tries to do a lot in a short period of time. So, basically, this book attempts to struggle with a lot of very severe topics. Let's talk about what it's about. It is about a young trans man named Akilda who is trying to survive in post-apocalyptic Dominican Republic. So there has been an environmental tragedy which has wiped out the oceans. The Caribbean Ocean in particular, is spreading into the Atlantic. It's like toxic brown sludge and all the fish are dead. However, he is just trying to survive. He is doing sex work to just try to keep himself afloat while trying to find gender confirmation surgery. It's sort of like an injection, but it's gender confirmation surgery. Then we also follow a timeline that is about, I would say, like 20 years previously to the start of Akilda's story, in which a group of artists are having a kind of artist retreat, and in that artist retreat, they are attempting to make enough work to save money so that the head of this artist retreat's wife can start a lab so that she can preserve a particular piece of the coral reef, which is near their home, again in the Dominican Republic. However, one of those artists is also having a bit of a problem because he is living in two parallel universes at once, and one of those parallel universes has to do with early 17th century piracy. So he is trying to live his life, both of those at the same time. So there's a lot going on in here, but more than that, there's a lot going on of mature topics, I guess I would call them. We follow a bunch of characters in this story, and we get inside some of their heads, and they say really horrible things. They fantasize about sexual assault, and they sexualize each other. There's, of course, talk of prostitution, including sexual prostitution of children, and then there's just a lot of talk about the environmental decline. However, none of those stories in particular feel very emotionally impactful. You don't get a lot of consequences for them. And so this book tries to mouth off really big and bad with all these swear words, all this slang, and yet at the end I'm struggling because I cannot figure out for the life of me why I don't feel like those are really difficult topics. Like, they just feel like they're so throwaway. Unfortunately, the problem with this book is that the lack of consequences that we feel for these actions makes it feel woefully immature. In the end, because of that as well, because of all these dreadful topics that were not handled well, this was a negative reading experience. I really did not enjoy reading it. I kept turning the page. On one of the first pages, the main character gets sexually assaulted. And so, going from there, it kept like going down a rabbit hole. It was quite difficult. I'm not sure I would recommend this one. Some of the technical writing saved it a little bit for me, so I gave it 2 stars rather than 1, but I would still say it was a fundamentally unenjoyable reading experience. Let's next talk about a book that I had a little bit more mixed feelings about. That was The Ministry of Utmost Happiness by Arundhati Roy. Now, this is the novel that I read from India, and it is actually, I would say, more a portrait of India than it is a portrait of any of the characters within it. So, for the most part, you follow a trans woman named Anjum from her early life up to her late years. It kind of spans the spread of really the early 60s to the early 2000s, and over that time you also follow some characters that intersect with her story. And so it's quite interesting to read because you are trying to figure out how everything is going to piece together. Unfortunately, that also makes it a very confusing read. This was Arundhati Roy's portrait of India, an attempt to really tell the story of a time really full of political strife when India was trying to come of age as a nation, and in doing so there was a lot of tension between Muslims and Hindus, and there's a lot of political satire in here about India at that time, and those were the parts of the book that I found the most interesting. If you want a comparison and you're familiar with the classic kind of Western canon, this reminded me a lot of Les Miserables, because it is a story less about the characters than it is a story about a place and a time, and that I found really fascinating. unfortunately, the thing is that I also found it a little bit confusing. Because we don't follow a linear narrative, we instead jump back and forth, going back decades to give a character's introduction and then following them for a few chapters and then returning to this kind of central pillar story. I really just struggled trying to keep up with what was happening at times, especially if you're, like me, not terribly familiar with Indian politics, and so you were trying to place events in, response to one another. That was quite difficult. So, with the passages of beautiful writing and the general confusion I felt reading it, I wasn't quite sure what to make of this book. In the end, I gave it 3 stars. There's definitely a kind of person that I would recommend it to, but maybe not someone who's just trying to listen to something casually, I would say. I'm going to leave you again on a positive note. That is another one that I thoroughly enjoyed. That is this book, Notes of a Crocodile by Miaojin. Now, this is the book from Taiwan that I read, and it follows a nameless female protagonist as she falls in love with another young woman at her university. It spans their relationship over a calendar year. They have decided at times that they want to be together, at other times that they can't be together. And so there's a lot of gay pining in here, some of which is beautifully written. I have a couple of post-it notes in here of writing that I just thought was fantastic. However, about 1 out of every 3 chapters are also about the crocodiles. See, this is a almost speculative novel, and in this novel we follow crocodiles, who are sort of not crocodiles like you would think of them today, but rather a kind of subspecies of human, or at least they wear human suits. It's a little hard to tell. So these crocodiles who wear human suits, they speak whatever language, Taiwanese I assume, or Chinese. So they do that, and then they go to work, and then have relationships, and they have jobs, but they're also secretly crocodiles. Now, at some point, crocodiles are leaked to the media. The media finds out that there are such thing as crocodiles, and so it starts not a manhunt per se, but a just craze for crocodiles. And so we follow one young crocodile as he attempts to navigate a world where he feels like people are searching for him, either for good or for ill. These passages were fascinating, and if you ever get tired of the kind of gay will they won't they of the rest of the book, it really is very interesting to read. I was flipping forward just wanting to figure out what happened. Now, this book, I think, in the end, ends up being 242 pages, but the chapters are quite short and usually only take up a portion of a page, and so this is a quick read, and it felt like a real page-turner. I really enjoyed it. I think I would give this one 5 stars. So there you have it. Those are the next 5 books that I read to forward my challenge of trying to read a book from every country. I think this was really fun. I especially enjoy reading books that are LGBT themed from around the world. That feels extremely rewarding to me, especially because sometimes the narratives of LGBT in the United States, I feel like many of them I have heard before, and so it's exciting to see other people's perspectives on pride and on coming out and on what it means, for example, to be gay or to be trans or to be bisexual within these books. That's very exciting to read. I think this was kind of an overall good month. I mean, any month where I find 2 new books that I absolutely adore, like Infideles and Notes of a Crocodile, is a good month. A month where I have 2 bad books isn't too bad at all. Now, if there are any other books that you would recommend that I read for this challenge, I will leave all of the countries that I have already read books from down below, and also my progress so far video if you're new and haven't seen me do this challenge before. Now, thank you very much for watching. Bye!